Very good evening to all of you. Thank you for joining us. I know it's a bit late, but as these multilateral events go, Prime Minister actually just returned from Schloss Elmau to Munich, and we really I would like to thank Foreign Secretary for taking the effort to come here directly from Schloss Elmau and briefing us. It's, I must say, but I think it's an important topic. As you know, Prime Minister is completing his 2-day stay here in Munich tonight, and tomorrow he goes to UAE. So without further ado, I would like to hand over the floor to Foreign Secretary. Also, I'll take the opportunity, of course, to introduce members of the table. Shri Dhammu Ravi sir, Secretary Economic Relations in the Ministry of External Affairs, as well as Ninad Deshpande, Joint Secretary Multilateral Economic Relations in the Ministry of External Affairs, who are here with us. Sir, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Arindam. My colleague, Mr. Dhammu Ravi, Ninad, friends from the media. Thank you so very much for joining us at this rather late hour for this briefing on Prime Minister's visit to Munich and to Schloss Elmau for the G7 summit. Prime Minister has just returned from a packed day of meetings in Schloss Elmau. Yesterday too, as you would recall through media reports, he had a number of engagements and he would be departing for United Arab Emirates tomorrow morning. This was the third G7 summit that Prime Minister is attending. Clearly this shows that India's presence and contribution in important gatherings such as G7 is valued by all global partners. India is looked upon as a solution provider and part of any sustained effort to solve the challenges which are currently being faced by the world. You would have, of course, noticed through various social media posts the body language of other leaders in their interaction with the Honourable Prime Minister, particularly the respect, camaraderie and comfort they enjoyed in interacting with the Prime Minister. At the G7, the Prime Minister spoke at both the plenary sessions today. The first session was on the theme of investing in a better future, which focused on climate, energy and health. The second session was on the theme Stronger Together, which addressed the issue of food security and gender equality. Prime Minister's interventions have already been made public, and you would have noticed that the primary focus of interventions in these two plenaries included key areas such as: one, on energy, that energy access should not be the privilege and everyone has the same rights on energy. Two, Prime Minister spoke very strongly about lifestyle for environment campaign, LIFE campaign, and to become pro-planet people. The widening acceptance of lifestyle for environment campaign, LIFE, can be gauged from the fact that one of the outcome documents makes a very explicit reference to the Lifestyle for the Environment initiative. That is the chairperson's summary of the G7 summit. Two, that India can provide the scale for every new technology to make it affordable globally. India's approach of one world, one health. In this, PM underlined the potential of digital technologies in the health sector. Holistic health and value of yoga and traditional medicine. Also the establishment of WHO's Global Center for Traditional Medicine in India. This was another point of highlight in Prime Minister's intervention today at the G7 summit. India's contribution towards ensuring food security of vulnerable countries and in our neighborhood in particular. Keeping value chains of fertilizers smooth and running. Innovative means to ensure food security through promotion of millets and natural farming was another thought which Prime Minister put forward very strongly during his intervention. On gender equality, Prime Minister spoke about India's shifting approach from women's development to women-led development. There are two outcome documents for the G7 summit. The first one is the Resilient Democracies Statement, This affirms a commitment to strengthening the resilience of our democracy, working towards equitable, inclusive, and sustainable solution to global challenges, including climate change and the COVID-19 pandemic, and a rules-based international order. It also acknowledges the importance of national laws and regulations that are in place in each country to advance the principles and values of democracy. The other outcome document, which I mentioned earlier in my remarks, is the Chair's summary on Just Energy Transition Partnership. This Chair's summary covers partnership that G7 members and a number of countries, including India, are undertaking towards addressing climate issues while ensuring energy security. India has been at the forefront of actions in areas like climate change, sustainable infrastructure, energy security, food security of vulnerable countries, global health, post-pandemic recovery, gender equality, etc. Prime Minister's participation in today's G7 meeting was an opportunity to share our perspective on all these important themes and issues, and these were very well received by other participants at the summit today. Our forthcoming G20 presidency would provide us the opportunity to carry forward this process, particularly as most participants today are also the members of G20. Prime Minister also had a set of very productive bilateral meetings with the heads of the state and government of many countries. Yesterday, he had his first in-person meeting with President Alberto Fernandez of Argentina. Enhancing South-South cooperation, particularly in the pharmaceutical sector, was an important topic of discussion at this meeting. The two leaders also discussed defense cooperation, cooperation in climate change and food security, as also measures to boost trade ties between the two countries. Today, Prime Minister met German Chancellor Olaf Scholz and thanked him for the invitation and his hospitality. This was the second meeting between the two leaders in just last 2 months. You would recall that Prime Minister had visited Berlin last month for intergovernmental consultations. Today, the two leaders reiterated their commitment to take forward a green and sustainable development partnership. With President Cyril Ramaphosa of South Africa, discussions covered the recent WTO decision on production of COVID-19 vaccines in developing countries, where India and South Africa had taken the lead and worked together to ensure that outcome. The two leaders also reviewed bilateral cooperation, particularly trade and investment, food security, defense, fintech, digital financial inclusion, and skill development. With President of Indonesia, Joko Widodo, discussions with Prime Minister focused on Indonesia's ongoing G20 presidency and elements of bilateral cooperation between India and Indonesia with regard to issues and agenda that feature in G20. With Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, the focus of discussions was on strengthening trade and economic linkages, cooperation in the space of security and counterterrorism, as well as people-to-people exchanges. With the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, discussions covered the need to deepen India-EU trade and investment linkages and recent movement in this regard through resumption of negotiations on the trade, investment and GI agreements, implementation of the Trade and Technology Council, which was concluded during Ursula von der Leyen's recent visit to India, as also some of the elements of bilateral cooperation that members of EU and India could pursue in economic areas. As you are all aware, yesterday the Honourable Prime Minister also addressed a large gathering of the Indian community at the Audi Drome in Munich. The exuberance of the attendees was visible to all of us who were there. Prime Minister was also the guest of honour at a dinner hosted by the Minister President of Bavaria last night, during which the Prime Minister highlighted the close contacts between the state of Bavaria and India. Overall, I would say Prime Minister's engagement in Germany and during the G7 summit have been a great opportunity to share perspectives with fellow democracies, the heads and governments of the G7 and the outreach countries, and exchange views on global and regional developments. As I mentioned earlier, there was clear interest in India's forthcoming presidency of the G20 and what role and contribution will India make in handling the issues, addressing the issues of global challenges. We will continue to engage with all our partners on global issues of importance going forward through these conversations. I would like to stop here, and if there are any questions, we'd be happy to take them. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir, for a comprehensive perspective. I see a few hands already. Please introduce yourself and your organization. Let's try to limit it to all questions. Let me start with the Manish.
सर मैं मनीष हूँ टीवी 9 भारत से। हम लोगों ने आज देखा कि कैसे यूएस प्रेसिडेंट को चेक कराया गया, कुछ कैसे वीडियो उसी से उनके बीच में हाथी में जरा लगा कि बातचीत हुई। क्या कुछ बातचीत भी हुई उसके बाद में, क्या दोबारा से प्रेसिडेंट बाइडेन मिले थे और कुछ इंटरेक्शन उनके बीच में?
So Siddharth, beyond the bilateral between the Prime Minister and the Canadian Prime Minister, was there mention of the Khalistani extremism? Because you mentioned that there was a focus on terrorism and security. So was there a specific mention of Khalistani extremism?
Manish Chand, India Rights Network. So Ukraine crisis were top of the agenda at the G7 summit. We're not on the table, but I'm sure it must have been in discussions, bilateral discussions with several leaders. What was your sense? They're coming out with tougher sanctions against Russia, and we do continue to maintain fairly extensive partnership with Russia even now. Do you think we'll come under renewed pressure? What was their expectation from India?
Sir, I will hand over if there are no other questions. Sir.
Okay. मनीष, जो आपका प्रश्न था राष्ट्रपति बाइडेन और प्रधानमंत्री की जो जिस वीडियो का आपने जिक्र किया उसमें देखिए, प्रधानमंत्री जी की आज जितनी भी द्विपक्षीय वार्ताएं हुई, जिन जिन नेताओं से भी बात हुई, और समिट की प्लीनरी सेशन के दौरान भी जिन जिन से पुल साइड में बातचीत हुई, पूरा वातावरण जो है, जैसे कि मैंने अपने रिमार्क्स में भी कहा, एक बहुत ही प्रधानमंत्री की जितनी भी वार्ता भेंट हुई, माहौल जो है एक बहुत ही गर्मजोशी, मित्रता, सद्भाव से प्रेरित था पूरी तरह से। और जिस तरह से अंतर्राष्ट्रीय स्तर की मीटिंग्स का जो स्वरूप होता है, उसमें काफ़ी बातचीत जो है वो साइडलाइंस पे ही हो जाती हैं। कुछ मीटिंग्स औपचारिक भी होती हैं, कुछ मीटिंग्स अनौपचारिक भी होती हैं, और साइडलाइंस पे भी बात होती रहती है। मगर मैं संक्षिप्त में यही कहूँगा कि हर नेता के साथ जो प्रधानमंत्री जी की वार्ता हुई, जो मुलाकात हुई, बहुत ही मित्रतापूर्ण और गर्मजोशी के वातावरण में हुई। और जो भी उन नेताओं के साथ हमारे बायलैटरल संबंधों को लेके जो महत्वपूर्ण मुद्दे थे, उनके बारे में बातचीत हुई। और ये वार्ताएं, ये बातचीत केवल समिट के प्लीनरी सेशंस तक ही सीमित नहीं थी। उसके अलावा साइडलाइंस पे जो बाकी इनफॉर्मल सेशंस भी थे, उसमें भी इन बातचीत को आगे बढ़ाने का काफ़ी जो है अवसर प्रदान हुआ था। सिद्धार्थ, जो आपका प्रश्न था कि योर क्वेश्चन वेदर इन डिस्कशंस विद प्राइम मिनिस्टर ट्रूडो what all came up for discussions, etc. Prime Minister, in his discussions with the Prime Minister of Canada, the areas which I mentioned to you covered essentially trade and investment linkages, security and counterterrorism cooperation, and promotion of people-to-people ties. I think Prime Minister made it very clear to the Prime Minister of Canada, but also to other leaders, that one of the major global challenges that all of us face is the challenge of terrorism, and that is something on which India has consistently adopted and advocated zero tolerance, and Prime Minister made that point very clear in his bilateral interactions with all the leaders wherever it came up, including of course with the Prime Minister of Canada also. Manish, your question with regard to the presence of Russia-Ukraine agenda during the G7 summit, the sense that you put in your question was a renewed pressure with regard to Russia, Ukraine, etc. I think naturally Ukraine was an important situation between Russia and Ukraine was an important point of discussions during the plenary. Prime Minister, in both his interventions, the first one on climate, energy, and the second one on food security, and the other item, gender equality. In both the sessions, Prime Minister made it very clear in terms of the position that India has advocated on the Russia-Ukraine situation, which I have at many occasions mentioned, and this included essentially immediate or as early as possible end to the hostilities and to the path of dialogue and diplomacy to resolve the situation. But Prime Minister also very strongly put forward, and I think we are fairly an important player in that aspect. Of course, it's a consequence which also we face, which is the knockdown effect of the Russia-Ukraine conflict, whether it is in terms of the crisis of food security, especially on the vulnerable countries, whether it is the challenge of fertilizer security, which all of us are facing, or also relating to the issues relating to the energy security. And the Prime Minister made it very clear that India has been in the forefront of contributing to ensure that the food security situation of the vulnerable economies, that we are upfront in addressing it to the best extent possible. Prime Minister did also mention that the energy security has become a very challenging issue in the wake of Russia-Ukraine conflict, but India would continue to do what it thinks is best in the interest of our own energy security when it comes to the question of global oil trade. I think our position, which Prime Minister articulated during the G7 summit, was well understood. I would even say it was appreciated across by his counterpart leaders from other countries. Thank you.
Thank you. You have questions? Okay, we just last week.
सर एनिमेशन लीडर्स अगर हम समझते हैं कि भारत एक मीडिया आउटरीच समिट से क्या वापस लेकर के जा रहा है, इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर पर जो फैसले लिए गए G7 के द्वारा, जो यूक्रेन को लेकर के जो स्टेटमेंट जारी किया गया, जस्ट एनर्जी ट्रांसफर पार्टनरशिप को लेकर के जो शुरुआत हुई है, किस तरह से आप समराइज करेंगे कि what is India gain out of this one way very important outreach summit along with the G7?
Is there any other query?
If I'm permitted.
Okay, well, we normally have one, but at least this is the last one.
So one of the important outcomes of the G7 summit is this infrastructure, $600 billion infrastructure plan, which is being touted as a rival or as a counter to China's BRI. That apart, it is about sustainable infrastructure, in which we are major states. What is your view on the subject? Did this figure in the outreach meeting which between G7 leaders and emerging economies?
So,
आपका जो पहला प्रश्न था कि G7 की इस शिखर वार्ता से क्या क्या हमारे टेक अवे होंगे, तो देखिए जो इस समय वैश्विक संदर्भ है, जो वैश्विक परिप्रेक्ष्य है, उसके मद्देनजर जितनी भी वैश्विक चुनौतियां हैं, उन चुनौतियों पे भारत का परिप्रेक्ष्य स्पष्ट रूप से पूरे विश्व के सामने और जो G7 के जो शिखर नेता उनके सामने एक स्पष्ट रूप से उसका प्रस्तुतिकरण और उसकी, जैसे कि मैंने कहा, डीप अंडरस्टैंडिंग और एप्रिसिएशन, ये अपने आप में एक महत्वपूर्ण चीज है। दूसरा, जिन मुख्य विषयों पे प्रधानमंत्री जी ने वक्तव्य 2 प्लीनरी सेशंस में दिए, एक पर्यावरण से संबंधित और दूसरा मुख्यतः खाद्य सुरक्षा से संबंधित, ये जैसे कि मैंने कहा आज के वैश्विक संदर्भ में अपने आप में बहुत बड़ी चुनौतियां हैं। इन चुनौतियां का विश्व के द्वारा सामना करना, उसमें भारत की एक बहुत ही महत्वपूर्ण भूमिका है। वो भूमिका सकारात्मक है, सहयोग से प्रेरित है, सहकार्य से प्रेरित है। ये दूसरा मैसेज पूरे G7 की शिखर वार्ता में न केवल स्ट्रांगली उभर के सामने आया, मगर उसकी एक प्रकार से स्वीकृति, तथ्य आधारित स्वीकृति जो है, वो अपने आप में दूसरी मुख्य। तीसरा, शिखर वार्ता के दौरान G7 के नेतागण तथा आउटरीच कंट्रीज के जो बाकी नेतागण, उनसे द्विपक्षीय वार्ता, जो हमारे द्विपक्षीय संबंधों के मुद्दे हैं, उनको आगे कैसे और तेजी से बढ़ाया जाए, ये अपने आप में भी एक काफी महत्वपूर्ण उपलब्धि है। चौथा, जो कि मैंने अपने रिमार्क्स में भी कहा कि ये स्वीकृति इस बात की, ये एक्सेप्टेंस इस बात की, ये रिकॉग्निशन इस बात की कि आज की विश्व की जितनी भी चुनौतियां हैं, उनके समाधान में, उनके सोल्यूशन ढूंढने में भारत की एक अहम भूमिका है। भूमिका के अलावा मैं कहूंगा कि प्रधानमंत्री जी के वक्तव्य से स्पष्ट था कि न केवल हमारी भूमिका हमारी सोच के माध्यम से है, बल्कि हमारे सहकार्य और सहयोग के माध्यम से भी है। तो मैं कहूँगा ओवरऑल ये शिखर वार्ता, जो कि आई थिंक कोविड महामारी के बाद पहली बार एक अंतर्राष्ट्रीय बड़ी शिखर वार्ता थी, हर प्रकार से जो है काफी ही सकारात्मक और प्रोडक्टिव महसूस हुई। उपलब्धियां भी स्पष्ट हैं। And that takes me to your question with regard to the infrastructure initiative which was announced. As I mentioned, the only 2 outcome documents which pertain to the G7 and the outreach countries together, one was on the resilient democracies, and the second one was essentially Chair's summary on the just energy transition partnership. I think the initiative that you are referring to, if my understanding is correct, is a separate G7 initiative, and to my recollection, unless Ninad, there is some other input, I think it is not the G7 and the outreach initiative. But whether it's a question of infrastructure or it's a question of addressing other economic challenges, as I said, Prime Minister's observations in both plenaries focused on this part, which is the sustainable solution, and the lifestyle for environment actually captures that part. I think the other initiative that you spoke about, we'll have to see the details of that for us to be able to speak specifically on its elements. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. That brings us to the close of this special media briefing from Munich on the ongoing visit of Prime Minister to Germany and UAE. Thank you, sir, also to Damuravi, sir, and to Ninad, and my colleagues. Good evening.
Thank you. Namaskar.